once again, a little confusion on my show, but hey, I'll eventually get it right and be Sprite and everything. So here I am broadcasting outside the fence of an undisclosed FEMA camp, dodging Russian paratroopers and escaping clone facilities at Dulce. It is I, the host who can weep more than David Wilcock, Michael Hemmingson, with the art of dreaming. My guest today, once we get him, will be John Kettler. John Kettler arrived on the alternative media scene pretty much in February when Carrie Cassidy had interviewed him, and he was quite popular. She's interviewed him 2 more times after that, and his website is pretty big now. He's got a lot of people reading it. The website is John Kettler Investigates at johnkettler.com. And how are we getting him?
He has to accept me.
Okay.
I'm waiting for him to accept me. I put down there that I'm producing for you.
Okay. Well, as we wait for John to get on.
He's a very interesting guest. I've heard him speak before.
Oh, on Carrie's? He's been on some other shows.
Yeah.
My cats are crawling all over me. They hear me talking and they think I'm talking to them.
Your cats?
Yeah. I have 2 cats. Worf and Poe, that's my nickname is from.
Ah, that's where you got it.
Yeah. They're black cats. Had them since 2002 now, 10 years, yeah.
That's quite a long time for a cat.
Yeah, I got them with an ex-girlfriend, and when she split, she didn't take them. Well, I wouldn't let her take them. So now it's kind of different since I move around a lot. I sometimes have to, from 3 different cities, I have to have friends look at them. They're okay for like maybe 4 days, but, and they're used to me being gone too. So
ain't none of them white, are they?
No.
White cats having a tendency to go deaf when they're left alone. Isn't that
really?
Isn't that strange? It's just a bizarre fact.
Never heard of that. What about calico cats?
No, it's just the white ones. Something to do with if they don't have the noise, they lose their hearing for some reason. I like cats. I'm a cat person myself. Dogs are all right, but I prefer a cat. They're a little cooler. You don't have to worry about them so much. He still hasn't accepted me. Are you talking to him on?
I'm sending him some messages. I talked to him just a few minutes before, and he said he had to go do something, but he would be back. Well, we'll just wait for him to show up. And there are a couple things I wanted to talk about. This whole issue with Drake, good old Drake, pretty popular online. He was over at Wolf Spirit Radio with his friend Diatra from freedomreigns.us. But last week or a week and a half ago, he was on and he started going off on Carrie Cassidy, and this is where his credibility with me just went out the door. He was upset that on Project Avalon forum, which Carrie isn't even involved with anymore, someone had dug up who he was. He was just going by Drake, but his name is Drake Kent, supposedly. And they were calling him an Illuminati shill, blah, blah, this, blah, blah, that. Anyway, he was so upset, he started threatening to have Carrie and Project Avalon Camelot charged as domestic terrorists for insulting him. He threatened to have his buddies in the Pentagon shut down their website, and he threatened that ninjas from the White Dragon family were also insulted, and they would come and chop Carrie up and kill her. What the hell? Here's a guy who's all for freedom. He's all for freedom. He wants to topple this current government and have all these people arrested, and yet he's threatening to have radio hosts be charged as domestic. Can you hear me? John? Hello?
Yeah, we've been joined by John Kettler.
Hey, John. Hello, John?
Hello?
John Kettler? Something's going on.
Hello?
Anyway, John, something's wrong. We hear you, but you apparently can't hear us. And I don't want to have dead silence here. Anyway, back to the Drake thing. So he's making these crazy threats. Doesn't even realize that the people posting in Avalon aren't Kerry. He thinks it's all coming from Kerry. And anyway, they resolved it, or Kerry called him, and he I don't know. I'm hearing two different stories from Wolf Spirit and from his side about why he left, and he was insulted and blah blah this. But after doing that, I mean, making crazy threats like that, I just don't buy his story anymore.
I don't even have any clue who he is.
He's some guy in Florida, a former non-vet, a former military guy who allegedly is the spokesperson for these white hats within the Pentagon who are going to start making a bunch of mass arrests of bankers and politicians and the bad cabal guys within the fiat money system and usher in a whole new economy and bring back the constitutional United States and that's another thing. He wants to bring back the constitutional United States, yet he's threatening to have people charged as domestic terrorists for insulting him. Now, that his credibility, and plus he's also saying now Obama is really a good guy and is going to reveal that he's been working against the cabal that created him all along, and et cetera, et cetera. So how are we with John? He's not.
I'm here.
Oh, hi, John.
Oh, you can hear us now.
Oh yeah.
Okay, John. We weren't sure.
Yeah, some settings issues or something. He Mad Painter was saying that he could hear me and asked me to turn my speaker up, so it's up. I hope I'm not blowing you guys out of the studio.
No, you sound great. Nice and clear. Are you on a headset or do you have a microphone?
I'm on a headset. I decided that there was less chance of reverb if I didn't use the built-in speaker and mic in my computer. It seems to work better at times.
Yeah. It sounds great. I was just talking about Drake. We'll get. I want your opinion on him later on because I know you posted about Drake. So let's get started. John Kettler, as I was saying before, was interviewed by Kerry Cassidy in February, and he was really popular on her show. She's interviewed him 2 other times, John, or 3 other times?
2 other times.
2 other times.
Once again on her show, and the other one on whatever it is, American Freedom Radio.
Okay. Oh, yeah, the other ones were video.
Yeah, kind of, sort of. There was one that was, they were supposed to be, but they didn't turn out that way. Let's put it that way. There were some major technical problems. I didn't have a camera for the first one, so all the video is from her end. The second one, I had a camera, and she was beset by every imaginable technical problem. So that one went up as a video that was really audio. And now I'm all set and ready to run, and the last program was a radio show, so go figure.
Okay, so why don't we start off with some of your background, so our listeners, I don't think every one of them have listened to Kerry's show or your other interviews.
Okay, how far back do you want me to take it?
So you used to work in the defense industry as an analyst in missile technology.
Yes, I worked for Hughes Aircraft Missile Systems Group. Hughes, that part of Hughes is now part of Raytheon. We built pretty much practically all the tactical missiles in the inventory. The Phoenix missile, the AMRAAM, the Maverick anti-tank missile, the TOW anti-tank missile, the GBU-15, one of the configurations of the GBU-15 guided bomb, and a whole bunch of other things. And then later on, I worked Fleet Air Defense, I worked Strike, I worked the WASP anti-tank missile program, which was a smart missile that went out and counted tanks and attacked the one it was supposed to be assigned to. And I was a threat guy. And then I transferred over to North American aerospace operations at Rockwell and was supposed to be coming in as a Soviet strategic analyst, but they reorged, and I wound up doing operational readiness and supportability for what became Rockwell's entry in the program that eventually produced the F-22. Nukes, bugs, and gas requirements on it, laser hardening protection requirements, a founding member of the Directed Energy Weapon Working Group, worked on the Advanced CAS, which was a low observables aircraft. That's a euphemism for stealth. Worked on the AC-130U, which is operational. Worked on the B-1B, conventional warfare capabilities. Founding member of the Directed Energy Weapon Working Group. Clearances through top secret, including CINWITI, critical nuclear weapon design information, secret, no foreign warning intelligence sources and methods involved. Little over 11 years in military aerospace before I had to get out. Health imploded, value system changed. Later worked on the Panama Deception, which was the Academy Award-winning expose of the real U.S. operations in Panama and the history of the involvement there. I have a primary research credit in that. I also worked on None Dare Call It Murder with Anthony Hilder. And I've been a student of things that go bump for a very long time. I used to get the Project Blue Book reports when I was a kid, in fact.
So this Panama Deception, this is a documentary?
Yes. Yes, it was Best Documentary of 1992. And it showed that we provoked the war with Panama. We had special units in place to do it, that they suppressed the number of deaths, that it was a test bed for very advanced U.S. equipment. Anytime you watch the History Channel and they talk about the F-117, they always talk about how great it did in Desert Storm. But they don't tell you the actual combat debut of the aircraft was in Panama the year before. And there's arguments raging to the day to whether they deliberately missed the barracks at Rio Hato, or they missed the barracks because they didn't properly compute the effects of very high humidity on their infrared targeting systems. But they never seem to talk about the invasion of Panama in connection with the F-117. It's just not glorious enough.
And you said that your involvement with this documentary got you on the government's radar?
Oh, I'm sure it did. The word I get is they felt betrayed. Here, we'd taken you in and nurtured you all these years and made you privy to all this stuff, and then you turned around and used it against us. There were some definitely ruffled feathers over that. Definitely ruffled feathers.
Okay.
The film was a huge success. It won not just the Academy Award, but probably 16 other awards.
And is that's available online for purchase, or
yeah, you can look it up there. It's available online for purchase. Yeah, the Empowerment Project, which was a church group originally. I don't know what it is today. These days, so far as I know, it's in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. But they didn't like some of the U.S. Central and South American policies, and they're the ones that put out cover up behind the Iran-Contra affair, which also won a slew of awards. I happened to go in on a visit at the behest of a friend of mine in a career workshop, and next thing I know, I'm talking to the co-producer, and she calls the director and co-producer, who finds out, gets the briefing on my background, and she basically says, whatever you do, don't let him leave. So I wound up working many, many weeks of 14-hour days because the guy who was heading up the effort as the film went into post, basically died in harness. And so I stepped in and took over working with a native Panamanian and did a lot of research on the whole history of the U.S. involvement there, how we got Panama in the first place, how we arranged it that there would be a war, how we ignored Noriega's known drug trafficking until he developed an independent foreign policy and went around bragging he had Mr. Bush by the cojones. That was when things started falling apart for Mr. Noriega. Before that, we knew he was drug laundering. We knew he was narco trafficking. We knew. We didn't care. But when he started making waves, that's when the hammer came down. And Panama was not just the test bed for the F-117, but for some really exotic stuff, indications of chemical warfare. I have reports that people who looked kind of like RoboCop with big backpacks were running around with, I guess, man-portable lasers. I've got accounts in the Spanish that were translated where a woman describes a light came through her window and set her refrigerator on fire, which sounds like a laser to me.
Yeah.
And I have background in lasers and laser threats and laser dazzlers and high-energy lasers, and my dad's worked on them for years, too. So, it was taking my talents that made me so formidable in military analysis in classified aerospace work and using it the other way. The last project I worked on when I was at Rockwell was the National Aerospace Plane Military Derivative Vehicles, what they called the NDVs. And these were a family of craft, some of which flew at lowish Mach, some of which flew at very high Mach, and some of which were fully space capable. And so my job basically was to cover any and all threats to whatever systems I was analyzing. Anything from a commando putting a bullet into the fuel tank of what was essentially a giant hydrogen tank, to deep space surveillance capabilities, satellite capabilities, high energy lasers, high power microwaves, all that kind of stuff. If it walked, crawled, swam, submerged, lived in a deep underground bunker, it was all mine, essentially. Or sailed the seven seas, for that matter. So I had a very broad job in terms of the things that I covered because I was the generalist.
And this was all through Hughes or other companies?
No, I was at Hughes from Valentine's Day of 78 until early mid-September of 84, and I took about 10 days off, and then I reported into Rockwell.
Okay.
And was with Rockwell until June 20th of 1989, when I ultimately resigned after just being torn to pieces by the job and a very dysfunctional project leader and some other things. And plus, I just got to the point where war work and I were just not on good terms anymore. I believed in defending the country, but I was working with people who, frankly, were warmongers. And I had a brother sitting on the border with East Germany in a Bradley unit. He was a platoon leader, platoon sergeant in a Bradley unit. I had a brother-in-law who would have been flying missions in C-130s. I had a family friend who would have been flying F-16 missions. So, I was very dedicated to the people out there, but not fomenting wars. I was about war prevention through preparedness.
Had you ever gone to any underground bases through this work?
No, I did not. I was on some compartmented programs. The NASP-derived vehicles program had 4 levels of clearance, and I had all 4. The crown jewel being the propulsion scheme and whatnot. I had nuclear weapon clearances and various things, but no, I've never gone to, say, Area 51 or S4 or the underground facilities at Wright Pat or any of those places. I have been to Wright Pat, but nobody let me into Hangar 18, let alone the underground.
What about Coronado base?
No.
Because I've heard that they had moved the Aurora from 51 to Coronado, and I'm down in Southern California, and I've seen some weird things flying around over Coronado.
I hadn't heard that, but they've tracked something on a weather satellite that was operating out of Area 51, and they tracked it in one frame coming from just off the coast of California to, well, where Area 51 is in one shot.
Wow.
Gives you some idea how fast it was going.
What year was this?
Oh, this was years ago. There's stuff flying out of Beale right now that is so powerful it blows people off the seats of their toilets.
Okay, so and then you started writing articles for Atlantis Rising?
Yes, I would say that was probably the mid-1990s. A guy I worked with when I was doing security work at a factory kept bringing in this interesting magazine, and I kept reading all these fascinating articles. And it's like, wow, this is really great. And then he encouraged me to apply, and so I got a shot at it. I contacted Doug Kenyon, and he sent me some possibilities, and I picked one and wrote on it, and went on to write stacks and stacks of articles for Atlantis Rising on just about everything you can imagine. Telephone telepathy, John Searle, radioactive waste cleanup, quantum potential weapons. I mean, I was his go-to guy for just about anything because I could write about just about anything.
What is telephone telepathy?
Telephone telepathy is when you know before the phone finishes ringing, and
okay.
It's more to the days before we had all the call indicators and whatnot, that you know who's on the other end of the phone. Okay? And in the test that they did, this is something Rupert Sheldrake did, they set up a test where they reasoned that, if you put psychics in labs, they get bored to tears, their performance falls off, they're with a bunch of naysayers, this is just not a good way to do psychic testing. So tell you what, we'll take the presumed psychic, we'll put the psychic in his or her home, and we'll arrange the experiment with 4 people who are close to the person. We'll put in appropriate video cameras and whatnot, make sure nobody's cheating, and we'll run the test. Statistically, over the long haul, you should know the answer 1 in 4 times. The actual number turned out to be about 43%, based on, I believe it was something like 1,500 trials. Well, that's statistically significant, whereas before they were arguing over decimal places and maybe 1 or 2 percentage points. Now you've got nearly a factor of 2 delta between the statistical expectation and the actual experimental results. That's telepathy. It's probably the single best proof of the existence of telepathy today in terms of reproducible science.
So I guess that would fall under, how some people, they call it an angry telephone ring. They know the person on the other line is mad at them.
It's your boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, or wife. Yes, those sorts of things. We are naturally telepathic, but we are very carefully taught to suppress it as we grow up. Those things are knocked out. No, you can't do that. No, that's not normal. And so there are certain groups that have more of a charter to do that than others. Okay. Your guy just sent me a note, and I had to read it.
Does he say that?
It's almost a canard in war movies to see a mother, a wife, or a girlfriend wake up screaming in the middle of the night because her guy on the other side of the world has just been killed.
Right.
Okay. There's the twin bond. There's another connection there. There's also been work done, on, it's pretty gory, but on rabbits and killing of their babies and their reaction and things like that. So there's a lot of evidence for it if people will just look at it.
What about, I've heard of souls incarnating into two or more bodies at the same time, trying to hurry up the karma, but they'll be connected to this other person in another state or another continent?
I don't know much about that. I have heard of sort of group souls inhabiting bodies. I know about walk-ins, and it sounds in a way almost like the twin flame concept, which goes to the soulmate thing too. So I don't know quite how all that fits together, and the things that I've been doing and blogging about don't get into that much or very often. I pick it up as an ancillary question unless I do something like step on a landmine by writing a post on a whole new take on ascension based on information from the EDs, the extraterrestrials, extra-dimensionals. Then I find myself in some pretty shaky ground because I'm challenging a whole series of beliefs that are carefully inculcated into people starting in.
Oh, we're coming on a break. When we get back, we're going to talk about Vimanas and the EDs with John Kettler. All right, we're back with The Art of Dreaming. My guest today is John Kettler. I'm Michael Hemmingson. I got disconnected there during the break. I don't know what happened to my internet, but hopefully I'm back. Are you still there, John? I can hear you.
Oh, yes. Yes, I'm here.
Somehow I got disconnected. So let's jump to you've published an ebook. So I have it here on my Kindle. Called The Quest: UFOs, Anti-Gravity, Vimanas, and Mystics. India's Black Projects and the New Warfare Strategy, which I take it is based on two of your articles from Atlantis Rising?
And a lot of new material, too, yes. I wrote those articles originally for Atlantis Rising. One of them dealt with Indian Black Project work to include apparently anti-gravity, but basically they were data mining their sacred scripts, which are written in Sanskrit. The Vedas, the Bhagavad Gita, the Mahabharata, and things like that. And they had produced, among other things, stealth material based on a recipe thousands and thousands of years old. Right,
so these Sanskrit texts are actually, they have blueprints of how to build these ships, right?
Not so much blueprints. The drawings that are seen of Vimanas and whatnot are fairly modern things, but there are descriptions of a whole series of technologies. A Vimana simply means in Sanskrit that which flies. Now, that which flies can be anything from what we'd think of as a hang glider to an interstellar spacecraft. They have them divided into a bunch of different categories. But if you read the accounts of the wars between the gods, and I use that in a little g sense, it is quite clear that they are using beam weaponry, guided missiles, nuclear weapons, and by the way, in case the readers don't know, that Mohenjo-Daro that they studied early in their childhoods was one of the earliest sites of civilization, has the same sort of shadows on the wall from nuclear thermal effects that you would find on the walls at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Okay, David Hatcher Childress has written a book called Ancient Atomic Warfare, where he looks at a whole bunch of this. And the Gobi Desert is strewn with what we would call trinitite. It's radioactive glass from large-scale nuclear warfare. In fact, the ETZDs tell me that that used to be a pretty lush area before they nuked the living daylights out of it, and that's why it's a desert today. Something to think about. So you have all these different Vimanas, and I came across a story by Sorchafal / David Booth indicating that a Vimana had been found in Afghanistan in a cave, and I started getting information from some very highly connected people that the story that Sorcha had put out was in fact true, that a whole string of world leaders had been to see this, that U.S. troops attempted to board the craft and were killed by some sort of defensive energy it emitted. The weaponry on this thing made our hydrogen bombs and whatnot look, like pea shooters by comparison. So there was a lot of effort to look at this thing and analyze it and try to get into it. The Russians tried by blowing a hole in the top of the mountain and lowering a cable, and everything went well till they tried to lift it, whereupon there was a bolt of energy that came up through the top, blew the living daylights out of a Hind helicopter and its crew, and they thought maybe the Mooj had done it, but that turned out not to be the case. They sent samples of the wreckage back to Moscow. Meanwhile, the U.S. studied and studied and studied this thing, which was Zoroaster's, as in Zoroastrianism's, personal craft. It was in some sort of a time well, for want of a better term, and they figured out a way to get it out. And I've got the story of the recovery of the craft and what happened to it subsequently. The word is that the C-5 crew that flew it back was fully prepared to abandon ship in an instant, because from everything they could tell it was live, and they didn't know whether it might decide to do something at any given time, since it had rather robust artificial defense systems on it. And it was subsequently taken from S4 in a raid by the ETZDs. Well, actually, it disintegrated to sand, and about the same time other craft were taken from S4, including one of the sports models that Bob Lazar described in his numerous talks and presentations. So, I mean, it's like the informing principle, if you would, that held the craft together was withdrawn, and it just disintegrated into its constituent components. So instead of this super powerful craft with weapons of unimaginable power, it just essentially dissolved into dust.
Do you know what its propulsion system was? Anti-gravity or
No, I'm sure it had anti-gravity, but we never got a chance to really take it apart. I mean, they poked and prodded it, but they were scared to death of it, too, until it inactivated itself, and then it just started sort of falling in on itself and ultimately just disintegrated, much to their consternation. Seeing as how they'd put forth special operation teams and knocked out the guards protecting the cave and, mounted a multi-million-dollar recovery exercise to get it back to Area 51 and S4, so it was like gigantic egg on the face over that. But truly, it was a weapon we had no business having. Nobody had any business having. The Russians tried to take it, and it didn't want to go. The thing just had to be neutralized, and it was. Higher heads prevailed, and so they made it go away. So much of the story's in my ebook, and the rest of it's in some posts on my site at johnkettler.com.
Yeah, so everyone out there, I would highly recommend John Kettler's ebook, The Quest. I was reading it off and on for the last month and read the whole thing last night, and it's quite fascinating. I've always been fascinated with the Vimanas. That's why I was asking about the propulsion system, because a lot of drawings show them with propellers around the body.
They've shown propellers. They've shown things that look like rockets. There are indications in some of the text that they had some sort of a Stirling cycle steam engine. Some of them had jets. They broke them into classes that would correspond to regional and intercontinental and global, and like I say, interstellar. Well, within the solar system, first of all, and then what are clearly interstellar craft. And they talk, I was going to do a thing based on the connection between the Vimanas and certain black projects, because this concept of the whirling vortex of Mercury is very significant, and you see it again in Joseph Farrell's the SS Brotherhood of the Bell, where he talks about what they're doing there, and they're rotating radioactively laced mercury at very high speeds and under very high electrical charges to create anti-gravity and all kinds of distortions of the local space-time continuum. So I was going to do something like that, and then I found this other thing, and I went, wow. And then so there's basically several parts to the book. There's the part on the data mining and what the Indians are doing, and maybe they've got anti-gravity, and will they be allowed to do the other side of it, which of course is free energy. And then another thing that they were doing was they were busy taking advantage of all the havoc the Chinese were causing in Tibet and debriefing all the terrified monks of their mystical secrets that allow them to do things like dry off a wet towel on their neck while sitting cross-legged in the snow, to move at very high speeds while in a trance-like state, to acoustically levitate stones and things of this nature. So I found some information in Naval Institute proceedings last year which kind of tied that together, and then my marvelous contacts provided me with some wholly new perspectives on India's nuclear program that undoubtedly will curl hair in that part of the world, curl it the wrong direction or possibly cause it to fall out. Because India is carrying out a giant bluff, and what kind of bluff I leave to people to read the book. I don't want to spoil all the fun.
And so your book is on Kindle. Is it on other sites like Barnes & Noble?
Oh, yes, it's on my site.
Oh, okay, so you can buy it directly.
It's on my site, and if you get it from my site, it comes with... it costs a little more, but you get it with an audio book read by me, and you will get an EPUB as well, so you can put it on Palm Pilots and Blackberries and things of that sort.
Oh, great. That's over at johnkettler.com.
Yeah, just http://johnkettler.com. But if you type it the other way, www.johnkettler.com, you'll get there too. The posts are at the blog. The book is right on homepage. And I should say that very shortly there's going to be an even more stunning book out called Extreme UFO Recovery. Did the U.S. recover a dinosaur-era UFO? Oh, wow. This one was too hot for one magazine to even handle. And it's going to give intelligence types major intestinal disturbances. It's got absolutely mind-blowing information in it on perhaps the most astounding UFO recovery ever made. And I've got detail upon detail upon detail of the who, the what, the when, the where, the why, the how, everything you can imagine.
Is that the one they found in the Antarctica, or?
No.
Okay.
It wasn't found in Antarctica. It was found somewhere else.
We'll just have to wait and read the book. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it reads kind of like a detective novel. And then there's some plot twists because of things that happened and some remarkable serendipities that led me into being able to confirm certain things that seemed ridiculous on the face of them initially. And anybody who thinks the government won't take the most drastic action to keep the UFO secret really needs to read this book. Because what really got me into trouble was it came with a trail of bodies attached to it.
Oh.
Okay? That they killed people to keep the secret.
Oh, yeah, they do that. So let's jump to what you seem to be known most for and write about in your blog is your communication connection with the ETs. So when did you start communicating with them?
Well, a couple of years ago, I went to somebody else's channeling. There was a person I knew and worked with who was forever coming up with the most out there stuff, even by my standards. And I went there and I said, well, I'll check it out. And what I found happening was this channeling session for this person. I suddenly found myself being able to follow. I could hear what was being said on the other side of the veil, if you would, and to a limited extent could view the being that was being talked to. Well, that got my attention. And from there, some other things happened. I started having telepathic contacts with certain people here on Earth. Some of them have gone on for months and even years. And I think maybe that kind of prepared the way. And then when I got going on the blog, I had a couple of things on unicorns and whatnot, because cryptozoology is near and dear to my heart. And next thing I know, I've got this story going about asteroid YU-55, and strange things start happening. And I start getting information from this same bunch of benevolent extraterrestrials, extra-dimensionals, that YU-55 has sentient beings on it, and that they're intervening to stop YU-55 from hitting Earth. We tried sending up an interceptor, and the nuclear detonation of a 2-megaton weapon was completely contained and did not affect the asteroid's flight path even slightly. There was some EMP, electromagnetic pulse, which 2 radio astronomy facilities on Earth detected, and that was reported back to me through my sensitive contacts. And they said that they had intervened. Basically what they did was they radically lifted the the flight path of the asteroid rush with something called a Krulian ship that this bunch of ETZDs didn't even know about at the time, that affected its trajectory, leading to a quote-unquote exercise called Operation Pacific Wave 11, in which basically UNESCO quietly deployed a whole bunch of vessels for a Pacific tsunami scenario. Had YU-55 continued on its trajectory, it would have hit in the Pacific at, say 27,000 miles an hour or thereabouts, penetrated the ocean floor, cracked that open, and it's not like a one-time heave, say, in Indonesia. When you drop something into the ocean that way, what you get is more like throwing a rock into a mill pond. You get reverberating waves, cycle after cycle after cycle of them. So basically, if this thing had hit, it would have probably destroyed the entire Pacific Rim. So what they did was they drastically lifted the altitude of the asteroid and they speeded it up such that the beings on it, who the Russians called the cat people based on intercepted transmissions, they said it sounded like meowing, were able to do what they'd planned to do in the beginning, which was make a slingshot pass, go around behind the Earth and come screaming out the other way, making use of the gravitational forces. There was no planned landing, and when I got to thinking about cats, a little light went off in my head, and I said, didn't the Egyptians worship cats? And I went back and checked, and yes, they did, and they so revered cats that they mummified them, and there was an Egyptian goddess called Bastet who had the form of a cat, and I kind of went, I wonder. So that was how Earth was saved, by direct intervention by the ETZDs. There was great consternation and confusion in the intelligence community over what happened and how it happened, but I'm sure a lot of people were grateful too. But this marked the onset of communication with the ETZDs on the one hand, and the beginning of a disinformation campaign against me on my site, and started to get threats. And the longer I went on with some of this stuff, the greater the threats got. And they were talking about lancing the boil, which is a euphemism for killing me. Somebody went from having rational discussions with me to out-and-out attacks on me. And, you can't produce witnesses. Well, I found 3 who observed the launch of the Intercept missile, which was an Atlas Centaur with a being demilitarized Russian 2-megaton nuclear warhead. That was our improvised asteroid diverter that was completely blocked by these ETZDs because they didn't want the cat people, if you would, hurt. So they saved Earth and they saved the cat people, and this thing has just been evolving ever since.
And when you say ETs, EDs, what exactly are they? Specific races?
That I'm not going to get into. I've been asked not to. It's order of battle information, and there is not just one war on, but a bunch of them. There have been, since I started this whole series of wars fought. The last one created almost as many casualties as the Vietnam War, but if it was ordinary humans in the battle, it would have been as many fatalities as the Vietnam War, but ETZDs are a lot tougher to kill, and their technology for bringing them back when they're really badly damaged is far beyond anything you can even imagine from Star Trek. But we're talking about a war raging way up in the dimensions, and spillover fire taking out a ship in dimensions closer to Earth. On my site in the FAQ, there's a section called John and the ETs, EDs, and it explains what can be said, and people who read certain of the comments and whatnot will be able to figure out some other things. But it's best to keep the opposition guessing as to exactly who's out there, where they're from, and that kind of thing.
So the opposition, are they the Dracos, Reptilian?
The Greys and the Psychopaths, yeah. Yeah, and the Hydras.
And I take it the Mantis creatures too, right?
I think I haven't heard anything directly about them.
My understanding that the Mantis they're a pretty ancient race, but they work with, or the Greys work for them, just as they work for the.
I think there are some good ones and some not so good ones from something I got recently, but I wouldn't want to hang my hat on that because I'm working from a memory of something I just glanced at.
Okay, we're coming up on another break. When we get back with John Kettler, we'll talk more about the ETs and EDs and how they're keeping the San Andreas faulty. So, John, when you communicate with them, is telepathic? Do you hear it verbally or language, or is it by like symbols and images?
It's English to English. Sometimes they have trouble expressing certain concepts. Sometimes I'm shown something or given a symbol representing it. Occasionally I can actually see who I'm talking to, and they certainly have the ability to block that if they want to. But it's more focused on whatever the task at hand is. I have the role that I have because of my particular background, my training. I would argue a lot of past/parallel lives as a warrior in various capacities. In my meditations, back during my military aerospace days, it came to me that one of the reasons I was doing analysis was I'd done so much warfare, I wanted to see it from another side and understand it in a different way. So I speak military lingo, I understand tactics and operations and strategy and disinformation campaigns and all that kind of stuff, all of which figures in here. Also, because many of them have no experience being on Earth, I provide a context in which for them to understand the incredible amounts of information that come flowing in. Their ability to monitor would make NSA weep in frustration. I mean, they can put a surveillance net on a planet where, as it was put to me, pretty much nothing larger than a sneeze will escape notice.
So does the same ET, ED always talk to you, or are there different ones, or are they in a group? Or
different ones. I mean, I have some primary contacts. Some of the groups have what I call ground contingents, people who are here who liaise with them and whatnot. But it's just like talking to you. On days when I'm run down, though, I guess it takes a significant amount of energy because I can wind up with a blinding headache in a matter of minutes. But interdimensional telepathy is not a common ability even on their end. Such people are pretty rare. So you could have the greatest skill set in the world, but if you couldn't communicate, it wouldn't do you any good. So I just happen to be a combination of things which put together works very well in this particular application. And they call themselves the Liberation Forces, and I think it's a great name. It's very evocative. They are here to liberate Earth from all those nasty critters you mentioned before, the psychopaths and the sociopaths, in addition, to destroy the New World Order and to help sort this planet out and give the people here a real chance. We've been under enemy control for millions and millions of years. That's what the reptoids really do. They're evolution dampers, and very, very good ones. And it didn't help that we made secret agreements with the Greys acting as agents for the reptoids, which sort of formalized things. But we could just as easily have chosen to make deals with the Liberation Forces. They want to denuclearize the planet, and they've taken some strong steps in that direction. Just ask countries who've had some of their nukes disappear or been disabled.
You said they took, what, about 200 missiles from China?
1,000.
1,000?
1,000. 20% of China's missile inventory was taken out in single operation by one ship. And we later obtained evidence that something major had indeed happened when the Chinese started reporting personnel transfers into 2nd Artillery Corps, which is the cover name for the group that controls all the medium-range and intercontinental ballistic missiles. I referenced it in the post, a wonderful study video that Jeffrey Carber's group in International Security Studies put out of Georgetown on what they'd found out about the Chinese missile complexes. It's just astounding stuff. Well, the ETZDs went into one of these things and carried off 1,000 missiles and transporters, and I fear a bunch of Chinese leaders all the way up to, but not reaching, division commander became organ transplant material because of it. The Chinese are very pragmatic. If you screw up, they shoot you, they bill your family for the rifle cartridge, and they part you out because they can make good money on that.
Would this have anything to do with the recent military coup that happened over there?
I don't think it had anything to do with the coup. China has been doing some very bad things, one of which gets into an area that you mentioned privately, this business of Chinese troops being seen on both borders of the U.S. That was possible because the Chinese were in bed with they were in bed with two separate groups. One is referred to as the elder race and lives topside with the Chinese and has for a very, very long time. The other group was the reptoids, and the reptoids provided the Chinese with essentially a giant transporter unit where you just put all your troops and equipment in an area and they can beam them anywhere in the world.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that.
And so what was happening was the Chinese were doing this. Now, maybe they had permission to be in Mexico, but the word was that if they were found in Canada, they were to be shot on sight because it's an invasion, an outright invasion. And this caused enough excitement that we went out and put a lot of people in the field on both borders looking for evidence. But if you know the story of Brigadoon, you know, this lovely town that's on Earth for only one day out of the year, it was kind of like that they had beamed out by the time we were able to get eyeballs there. Well, subsequently, one of the branches of the Liberation Forces went in and smashed the reptoid base, And even before that, that transporter unit was removed because that was just, I mean, it's like zero warning time nightmare. You know, a division comes out of nowhere, essentially.
So, you in your last interview with Kerry, you had said you needed to look into the issue of the Chinese on the Mexican border some more. Now, in my case, I work off and on as a journalist down in Tijuana. Mainly, I cover the drug cartel issue, but I have, in the last several years, noticed an incredible amount of Chinese immigrants moving into Tijuana and the border area like Calexico, and they're all male, and they're all 20s to 30s. They all seem to have a lot of money. The Chinese are investing in the infrastructure with new buildings and stuff, but there are literally tens of thousands of these guys who've just moved to Tijuana. Now, why? Now, I've been out in the desert area of the border between California and Mexico, and I've seen Chinese military out there, and their embassy states that they're just there for training purposes because the desert area is similar to the Chinese desert area. Well, I mean, if it's similar, why
are they there?
Yeah, why aren't they trained in China? So, and then I've also been told that the military guys, they're posing as civilians. The guys are just wearing civilian clothes, but you know, when the time comes for whatever, they'll get into your uniforms, and also that they're dressed up as a Mexican military. The Mexican military, they wear the ski masks, so you can never tell what nationality they are.
Right. Yeah.
Now, as for their invasion, I wouldn't know, or if they're underground or whatever. Did you find any new information out?
Somebody was claiming they had underground bases by the U.S. border, and I mean, I could just hear raucous laughter telepathically over that one, and the suggestion was greeted with derision. I mean, it made me nervous initially when I heard it, but the word is they don't have any underground, deep underground military bases or anything like that. The kind of capability we're talking about, you could bring in tanks, you could bring in armored infantry fighting vehicles, you could bring in connexes of equipment and all that. And you put it under essentially a holographic net that can't be seen through by radar and visual means and whatnot. But once you're up under it, you can see just fine. So a rather daunting combination, to say the least. And it made plenty of people nervous, and favors were called in and whatnot. And we put some serious quantities of people on the ground over a large area looking for evidence, and they didn't find it. But I have a friend who works on the docks in Los Angeles, and years ago, he's a stevedore, he was telling me about something that he'd noticed where, it seemed that all these Chinese merchant vessels would tie up at the port, and the crews would leave, and they would never come back. And they were male, young, fit, just like what you're describing. So the thought was that they were going into Chinatown and blending in there, and that they were forming a fifth column. Meanwhile, China has also run a number of operations against us where they were doing things like leaving shipping containers full of their version of the RPG and hand grenades and their version of the AK-47 and whatnot in ghetto neighborhoods and things of that nature. Plus, they were buying a lot of influence in Congress and things of that sort. So they definitely are preparing to make some sort of move. They've threatened our carriers with anti-carrier ballistic missiles. They're threatening Taiwan with nuclear missiles they're busy installing as fast as they can out in the Gobi Desert. And generally gearing up for war, but not right away. They've got multiple carriers being built, but the thinking is that they're not going to be ready to go to war till something like 2025. My personal hope is we will have all these things sorted out long before then, like maybe some of the major changes will be in place by the end of the year, and the Chinese have already been shown to be vulnerable to raids, and the things that the liberation forces particularly hate are nuclear saber rattlers, people who threaten others, and the Chinese are most definitely threatening. And so, you know, they've been out attacking their neighbors. They've been bullying the locals over various islands in connection with oil formations that have been found. Most recently, they've been doing it in the Philippines, and the U.S. Navy had to be called in and eventually backed them down. So they're very serious about what they're doing, and they're building tremendous infrastructure, big dams like Three Gorges and whatnot. And I
hear they're also trying to buy the Panama Canal.
I've heard that too. They tried to buy the port of Long Beach. I think we managed to stop that, thank goodness. They've been buying up gold at well over market prices. So they've been very busy. And apparently they put a huge portion of their total infrastructure outlay into their super duper secure missile complexes. But see, the reason the liberation forces have such a problem with nukes and why the dawn of the atomic age in standard history, if you would, attracted so much attention is that when a nuke goes off, it rips through the fabric of time. It rips through the dimensional veils. So it not only annoys whoever it's dropped on, but it annoys the neighbors as well. And it creates holes through which things like reptoids and greys and dracos and hydras can get in. And indeed, they conduct operations designed to tear such holes. So if there are no nuclear weapons to detonate, then it makes the problems a lot more manageable. So the countries that can't or won't operate properly have things happen to them. Pakistan's had several nukes from its inventory taken. And as I reported recently, 2 were stolen by terrorists, apparently destined, according to U.S. intelligence, ultimately for Russia. They were recaptured by the liberation forces in, I think it was Lebanon, and then they flung them into the sun just as 5 reptoid motherships came through the Stargate, and basically what it did was it reinforced a solar flare that was occurring, and next thing you know, you have fricassee of reptoid motherships and 750,000 cooked lizards. Now, why?
I wonder if they taste like chicken.
I've heard more like gator, and I actually have a recipe that I got from the liberation forces. But you're talking about something 10 to 12 feet tall with the strength of somewhere between half a dozen and a dozen men and an ability to leap like you'd never believe. They can also avoid a lot of weapon fire by dimensionally shifting and things like that. So imagine 750,000 of these things arriving on Earth, as if we didn't have enough problems.
Yeah, that would change things quite a bit.
And they used weapons too. I've got a report from like Wisconsin where a guy in the National Guard reports his unit did urban fighting training in an abandoned mall, and the following week they were doing urban fighting training with reptoids.
Wow.
Yeah, wow.
That kind of blows my mind away there. One of your recent posts caught my interest quite a bit was about this alien queen that tried to take over a planet or something like that.
Well, that was actually in the newsletter to the insiders, and I don't have that great a handle on it, but it was the cause of the most recent war. A insect queen thought Earth was in such bad shape she could come use it as a place to lay her nest. She thought it was basically a dead world, as I understand it, and just descended with no warning with her host. And next thing you know, the liberation forces are fighting a battle raging on I don't know how many dimensions at once. And it spilled over to the lower dimensions and knocked out a ship. The ship was captured in a force field, and so it never crashed on Earth or anything like that. And so far as I know, there weren't any injuries to the crew. But it illustrates what can happen. Also, time is different. One of our days is like 30 of theirs. So if I hear about a battle that happened last week, that was 3 months ago.
Okay.
You know, that kind of thing. Well, actually, it's worse than that. If it was yesterday, it was a month ago, and so forth. So in the space of a few days, you could have, not battles, I should say, wars. Major knockdown, drag-out fight wars with huge fleets involved, and apparently in higher dimensions, beings express in very, very large size and indulge in individual combat and all kinds of things. It's a very strange sort of thing to try to get one's head around, but I've had some experience of it myself where I was being attacked some years ago by a ship and tracked it out there and issued a warning saying you best knock it off, and kept doing it. So finally I just you remember the Star Trek episode where Apollo was holding the original Enterprise between his thumb and forefinger?
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Something like that was basically what I did. I don't know whether it was projected consciousness or whatever, but I issued the warnings and then I crushed that thing like an egg, and I thought that was going to be the end of it. But another one attacked me. So it met the same fate. And when it became clear that I wasn't going to be left alone, I went on the warpath, and I basically went out in this, I don't know, my astral body or whatever. I don't have a good handle on it, but other people have described doing similar things, so I know I'm not having a hallucination. I went out and destroyed somebody's entire navy, not just the ships, but the dockyards, the manufacturing facilities, the headquarters, the storage depots, you name it, I destroyed it. I was really steamed. I said, hey, you know, I gave you all the warning in the world. You know, and something was attacking me more recently, and I went out and felt into it and somehow broke through this field that was protecting it, and here's a nasty-looking wizard with some very nasty control equipment that allowed him to operate against the world as a whole, regions, countries, cities, even individuals. And, well, I don't know why, but I produced a battle axe and proceeded to cleave this individual in twain, as they say.
Now, when you say you go out, does your consciousness inhabit a synthetic body like a lot of these super soldier MK Ultra guys say?
Oh no, I don't think it's that at all. I think it's I go out in an astral body to these other dimensions and I find things, and sense things, and I have had to repeatedly destroy beings that were attacking me. As strange as that sounds, but then this whole conversation's strange.
There's there's someone in our chat room, Justin. He lives in Long Beach, and he says the Chinese do own that port, and I've heard the same, that Clinton actually brokered the deal.
I wouldn't be surprised. Clinton made a lot of sensitive technology available to the Chinese. He arranged port visits by our most advanced naval vessels. There's just been a lot of stuff. I mean, they launched sensitive spacecraft payloads that we know were compromised, the so-called dual-use technologies. As soon as the Cold War ended, the Council for Foreign Relations magazine, Foreign Affairs, started talking up China as the emerging threat. And I said, I knew it, I knew it, I knew it. Because in order to keep this whole thing going, this gigantic military, industrial, political, extraterrestrial complex, as some now call it, you always have to have an enemy. And China was the closest thing, so there was this crash effort to build China up as a threat. China used to be a joke. I mean, unless you had to fight it on land. It had 1950s vintage medium bombers. It had no ICBMs. It had a bomb, but pathetic delivery capabilities. It was very, very backwards. Not so much today. In fact, I've had explicit warnings passed to not provoke China. You know, that was a message to the U.S. that got passed through my contacts on up the pipe. The Chinese have had this very advanced race living with them. The Chinese have been heard to brag at electronics conferences that they're so far ahead of us we can't even comprehend it. They have robbed us blind with espionage, and the Israelis have robbed us blind with espionage and sold some of our most sensitive systems and programs and everything else to the Chinese. The Patriot missiles that were intercepted in Finland were destined for China. And those are anti-ballistic missiles, very, very advanced models. They've got the radars for the Patriot already, from what I understand. Terabytes of data on the F-22 have been leaked. They train some of their best people here, and then they go back to China and take advantage of that. And, of course, you know, it was deliberate policies that put our manufacturing base in China, to the point that when the Army adopted the, in my view, stupid black beret so we could look cool, a lot of those berets were made in China. We're buying ammunition from China, if you can believe it. Military ammunition.
Now, was that missile that got shot out near Catalina about a year and a half ago, that was from a Chinese submarine, I take it?
I'm not really sure on that one.
Okay. But my understanding is that Clinton...
That Obama was launching on somebody to start a war. I really don't know the details, but I have seen arguments that the Pleiadians shot it down. Now, it is a matter of record that intercontinental ballistic missiles have been shot down by UFOs before. We've got cinetheodolite footage that's been seen of this sort of thing going back to the days of our first ICBM, the Atlas.
Right. And you've also written about recently that the ET-EDs had intercepted these dolphin submarines.
Right.
Could you explain that a little bit more?
The Bremerhaven?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a very complicated and very controversial story, but apparently from what I've been able to piece together, what happened is this. Russia is not supposed to be proliferating nuclear weapons and has been doing it and is in trouble with its off-world ally because of it. And the punishments for violating the treaty are dire. I've mentioned some of them, like they're going to make all the most advanced Russian fighters, which have energy cannons supplied by the off-world ally, all of them disappear. This is going to smart. 4 nuclear warheads that initially, in a garbled report, were thought to come from an SSN-19 ICBM were, in fact, SS-19 rather, turn out apparently to come from a very nasty Russian rocket-propelled cruise missile called a P-700 Granite, or in our nomenclature, SSN-19 Shipwreck. It's found on Kirov-class cruisers, 20 launchers, and on Oscar 1 and 2 submarines, 24 launchers. Carries a metric ton, metric ton class conventional warhead, or a 500 kiloton nuke. One such warhead apparently wound up aboard a Dolphin submarine, which, even though it was very closely surveilled, supposedly sailed out of the harbor and vanished. That's one view of it. Another view of it is the liberation forces say they've got it, they've got the bomb, they've got a German skipper and a French crew. Apparently this thing was intended to be delivered to Israel. Not happening. As I say, it's very controversial. A senior British official who was asked about this, in the words of a contact, melted the phone with what he had to say about it. But it's very clear that some strange things went on with this, because the entire British AWACS fleet, E3Cs, was stood down for maintenance at the same time. And these aircraft all carry very sensitive nuclear detection gear. It's not known whether higher command was notified of the maintenance stand down. If higher command was, then there would have been other aircraft in position to monitor and track, but we don't really know. But, Germany's not supposed to have nukes. Russia's not supposed to be handing them out to anybody. From what can be told, Putin wasn't directly involved. There's some speculation that Medvedev, his political rival and the previous president, may be behind this. But Germany's in big trouble. Germany should have been in big trouble long since, because it's been selling ultracentrifuges and chemical and biological warfare manufacturing equipment to anybody who would pay. Iran, South Africa, Israel, you name it, it's been doing it. And consequently, Germany's on the Liberation Forces list, and it's not the Christmas list. They have big unpleasant plans for Germany in consequence. So apparently 4 nukes were known to be in Germany. They were being very closely watched. One was put aboard the sub. The sub was being very closely watched despite the surveillance aircraft being stood down. There was even I believe it was a Royal Navy destroyer in the area keeping track of it, and it just poof, gone. Now, just poof, gone has happened before. It happened in the Persian Gulf. It was in broad daylight to about 40 Iranian suicide boats and missile boats. It was seen by embedded reporters. It was seen by Navy and merchant crews. It was seen by ship's captains and twittered on extensively, and then disappeared because, I mean, they were in their attack runs and gone. The reporters were all gagged. The tweets were taken down by NSA, CIA showing up at Twitter headquarters. And so a very major action just became a non-event. And we thought at the time they got I thought at first it was an Iranian sub, then I thought it was an Israeli Dolphin. But apparently when the thing disappeared from being tracked by several U.S. attack subs in the Gulf at the time, they've got a new screening technique that they can use to break away. So the ETs, EDs didn't get that one, but they got this one. And I'm hoping before too long I will have concrete proof of that and a lot of other things. It's a matter of certain technology being passed to certain people. The Liberation Forces technology is holographic rather than like our computers. So, but what you can do is you can photograph a hologram, and that in turn can be presented. So I'm hoping for a breakthrough there, and of course I'd be lying if I didn't keep asking to go see these things in person, and that might happen. I've made it clear that things need to be externally verifiable. So I got my wish with the North Korean thing, because Thursday night North Korean time, their unknown to us facility exploded. We knew there was a facility there, but we didn't know what it did. It exploded. And then Saturday, I got basically an explosion in my face right after I went to bed exhausted. It had palpable force and everything, and I thought I was going to be blown out of my own bed, even though I was dead tired. And Sunday, when I talked to the ETs, EDs, I was informed that that was the Thursday event, but because of the dimensional differences and delays, it took that long to reach me. But subsequently, and they said that there was a rocket fuel manufacturing and storage complex on top, but underneath that, much like at Dimona, the Israelis have a reactor, and then below that a nuclear weapon manufacturing facility. The North Koreans had a biowarfare facility, and according to the reports from my contacts, there's a pretty good-sized deep crater there where apparently the ruined rocket fuel complex fell into something below it, kind of reinforcing the whole notion that there was what they said there. So that was visible from space. It was promptly reported, and other reports have come in, and the North Koreans have admitted an unexplained fire at one of their rocket fuel facilities. Well, it's not one of their rocket fuel facilities. It's their only rocket fuel facilities. So there won't be any Typo dongs or no dongs or Unhas or anything else launched for quite some time to come, because they have no fuel.
A couple people in the chat room want me to ask you about the hybrid programs, what you know about it, the human reptile or human gray hybrids.
Okay, well, that work is definitely going on, has been going on for quite some time. There are some people who've actually rescued people from that program. They're trying to find a way that they can operate in this environment by hybridizing between the grays in particular, and and the humans, and I'm told by the ETZDs it's not necessary, that everything that they're looking for is already in the human genome. They don't need to make these half-breeds, in other words. And you can do all kinds of amazing things. If you activate the right genes, we can grow wings, for example.
Right.
But some of the most horrific stuff that goes on occurs at Dulce in the facility known as D6 under Archuleta Mesa, and at Pine Gap in a nearby facility very similar to that one. These are scheduled to be turned into what are known as ant farms within the liberation forces. They have the means to root them out of the ground and make them very interesting displays.
So do you know if there's hybrids living among us in society that look human?
I'm sure there are. There's all kinds of things living among us in society, and the UFO literature is full of accounts of, for example, women being snatched up and basically given a very sickly-looking hybrid baby to nurture, because they don't know how. Apparently, they thought emotion was a bad thing, so they bred it out of themselves, and now it's come around to bite them in the backside. They have, they've taken men and vacuumed out their sperm so that they could fertilize their own women, using the term loosely. There are cases on record of a guy who thinks he's mating with a beautiful woman who then turns into something else entirely. I think this is probably holographic screening at work.
That happened to Whitley Strieber.
Pardon?
I said it happened to Whitley Strieber. He had sex with a gray female, and he believes they had a child.
Yeah, so, you've got this hybridization program going, and a number of races seem to be trying to put back in what they bred out of themselves, and they've discovered that they put themselves on a dead-end evolutionary path. So now they're back to try to sort it out, but there are ways to do things that don't entail doing these terrible traumatic things. I saw an episode of sightings in which two women were introduced who realized later on in life that they'd encountered each other several times when being abducted. One noticed an old school jacket with a patch in her new friend's closet, and the light went on, and these poor women were covered with those scoop marks they talk about in the abduction books. Covered. It looked like somebody had done a torture exercise on them. I don't know whether they're gathering genetic material or what, but it was pretty disturbing to see. And, like I say, guys have been vacuumed out. Guys have mated with what they thought was a woman, and it turned out not exactly. And she kind of rubs her belly, and you get the sense that, oh, yeah, well, that took right away, so that's great, and throw his ass out, basically.
Well, I know that researcher, David Jacobs, some of the people he's been working with are human instructors. They're given some hybrids. They help them merge into society. Like they help them buy, rent a place, how to shop, how to interact with people when you're at the grocery store, and all that stuff.
Well, where was it I read that? Over on Bibliotheca Pleiades, Ingo Swann talks about telepathy and the ETZDs. And he talks about some experiences this guy had where he was made aware of their presence, and then, under very shadowy circumstances, so super secret that he didn't even have to sign security oaths, okay, because that would have left a paper trail. And he subsequently ran into some beings in a grocery store, this gorgeous, gorgeous woman, and he realizes, hey, that one, and that one aren't from here. And then gets debriefed over that and whatnot. So, are there aliens among us, as the question goes? Yes, there definitely are. Are there clones? Yes. Way too many, because some people have as many as 10 or 15, and the clones have learned how to produce clones, which makes things even worse. And clones are easily controlled. Then you've got doubles, if you've seen pictures of people, of famous people who have this kind of pronounced S-shaped scar up into their hairline.
Right.
Those aren't real, famous people. Those are doubles, and their heads have a bunch of electronics in them and everything, and they put them out in public as distractions. For one thing, it gives the real person time with family and things of that sort. You can also be in several places at once, which is handy. If it's just something innocuous like showing the flag, you can be off doing something more substantive. So, and this is one of the things that's caused a lot of controversy, but the figures I've gotten from a number of places say that of all the sentient beings on the planet, only 40% are true humans. The rest are clones and reptoids and greys and Dracos and psychopaths and all this other stuff.
Well, with the Dracos, Drake, I want to ask you about Drake, this guy Drake. You published one blog post where you state that the ETEDs are protecting him. Has your information or opinion changed about him since then?
I frankly am very confused. So are my contacts. Especially when I read the interview where he talked about way back in the 70s, I think it was, the what they called the plan was already filling up a 5-inch binder. Will Colby wrote, the first rule of keeping secrets is never write anything, never put anything on paper. 5-inch binder kind of puts the kibosh on that. There's a concern within the government that this might lead to a real insurrection. It's been made quite clear to me that the U.S. military has absolutely no desire to get involved in a domestic thing, but that something like 90% of all the members of the military would refuse to attack Americans, even if so ordered. So that's kind of comforting. But what makes my contacts and my head split is if you're planning on doing something like this, you don't really talk about it.
Right.
And if you put yourself out there as a spokesperson for something and you're liaising with all these groups, well, how difficult is it to follow somebody like that around and see where he goes and who he talks to? I mean, and yeah, there are Pearl Harbor files to protect him, intended to deter attacks on him. And I've read some things which suggest that he said more than he was supposed to, so he's in trouble with his quote-unquote sponsor. But this is one of those things that just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. And I've got a comment just today that's relayed where somebody's saying, okay, well, the way this thing is supposed to work is the sovereign citizens ask for help from the sheriff or the marshal, and who in turn contacts the military, and the military goes and deals with it. This avoids violating the Posse Comitatus Act. But the timeline was basically blown. It was supposed to be 30 to 45 days. The best estimates I've heard from the ETs, EDs is sometime maybe more like October. Apparently there is topside protection being provided. But if you really think that the country's going down the tubes, and I think an excellent case could be made for that, although there's a pronounced whiff of desperation in the air coming from the other side. It's racing to complete its agenda, but, is being thwarted at every turn. Multiple wars have been stopped that would otherwise have broken out in the Persian Gulf and very likely created World War III, seeing as how Russia and China, both of which have some very nasty weaponry, courtesy of their off-planet buddies, said they would wade in defense of Iran. So you've got a huge potential for escalation there. You've got all this stuff going on, and yet that hasn't worked out. They tried to rip apart the New Madrid Fault, which was very active, and the liberation forces barely got a ship there in time to stop that. The first charge went off, and they managed to substantially stifle that, and the rest of the ones that were supposed to unzip the fault were stopped, and then they went in and stabilized it and have been bleeding it off. But people need to understand that the New Madrid Fault system contains the major electrical trunk lines, the major natural gas trunk lines, the major gasoline shipment lines. All that stuff is there. And what was an area with like one person every 5 square miles is now very heavily populated. And a lot of the cities are on river bottom land and whatnot. When it went before, it convulsed for weeks and the Mississippi ran backwards. If that thing comes open, it will basically create an inland sea in the United States. It would destroy the United States as we know it. They stopped that. They tried something else. They stopped that. They're trying to do it all over again with Fukushima, and there was definite off-planet negative involvement in that, and so that matter is being taken to a council, and they're looking for specific intervention on the basis of that, too. But they have stopped one initiative after another, after another, after another. The chemtrail aircraft are becoming scarcer and scarcer. Some have even been observed being shot down. I published a picture a guy in Europe sent me of what happened when one of the craft just dropped right in on the chemtrail aircraft. And you see what must have been damaging to the aircraft panic reversals of course. Like 4 or 5 aircraft all cutting, half donuts in the sky to get away from this thing. Unfortunately, it didn't stay in frame long enough to be caught by the cell phone snap. Right. But what's there is impressive, and a lot of people are reporting substantial relief from the chemtrails. There are other areas where they're getting pasted still. But so the cabal, the NWO, the dark forces, whatever appellation you wish to give them, have been rushing to make this planet uninhabitable, rushing to bring about the New World Order, trying to create any and all excuses to do it, passing legislation that wouldn't pass the first most elemental constitutional test, largely unchallenged by the Supreme Court. The president is rubber stamping one outrage after another, and the list goes on and on and on. But they can't seem to get any traction. They keep trying to do things, and, bad things keep happening. Their most secure facilities are raided. China lost 20% of its nuclear inventory. Israel's had its missile force tied up in a knot, more or less. It can't even fire a missile, from what I understand. Pakistan's had nukes taken away from it. Some of our most sensitive facilities have been raided. Same thing with Russia. Same thing with Japan. Israel got its hand on a French boomer it was never supposed to have, a ballistic missile sub. The ETs issued repeated warnings. They weren't heeded. They even apparently created a severe storm in an effort to get them to stop.
Oh, we're at the end of the show now, John. Came a little sooner than I thought. Well, thank you for coming on. We had John Kettler. Go to his website, johnkettler.com. Buy his book on Vimanas. It's a fascinating read. And thank you again, John.